I read about a study recently done on mice. And some of you are already uncomfortable with that picture on the screen.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And scientists got together a collection of mice and just decided they were going to make the happiest mice in the world. They were going to create this environment where the mice would be well-fed, well-tended, take care of all their medical needs, and have no concerns in the world. So these mice wouldn't have to hunt anymore. They wouldn't have to go out scrounging for food. So they wanted to see what would happen, like you saw in the clip with the humans, if you just tried to make mice as happy as possible. And ultimately what happened with these mice is, they became overpopulated and they ceased being mousy anymore. The male mice stopped defending their territories. The female mice started turning on their offspring and driving their children away. And so they found out in this mouse city that they started isolating themselves into little groups and no longer acting like mice. They really basically, because they had everything that they ever wanted, they had nothing to live for, and they ultimately all got sick and died. So somehow, some way, having every mouse's dream fulfilled ended up with a bunch of unhappy, dead mice. And as you saw in the clip, the clip is from the Pixar movie WALL-E, and obviously it's trying to make a similar statement, is that when you give human beings everything they ever wanted, they somehow become less than human. It just doesn't seem to turn into what human beings were designed to be. Charles Swindoll wrote a book called Improving Your Serve, and in it he talks about this. He says, "Our world has become a large, impersonal, busy institution. We're alienated from each other, and although crowded, we are lonely, distant, pushed together but uninvolved. No longer do most neighbors visit across the backyard fence. The well-manicured lawn is the modern moat that keeps barbarians at bay. Hoarding and flaunting have replaced sharing and caring. We're on an elevator with rules like no talking, smiling, or eye contact allowed." I really like this line. He says that the well-manicured lawn is the modern moat that keeps barbarians away. Maybe some of you are in this room. There's people who, when they mow the lawn, they mow it in strips and then they mow it in alternate. Does anybody I just want to know. Does anybody do that? We got 1, 2, 3, 4. You mow it so you get the real pretty diagonal squares, and I'm not preaching against that at all. But what I am saying is that a lot of it, part of the reason we do that is personal fulfillment, but part of it is because when people pull up, we want them to go, "Wow, your lawn looks so nice," right? I've noticed that about my own life, is if I hang a wall hanging on the wall, part of it is because I enjoy the art, and part of it is because I want to tell people about it when people come in my house. I want people to notice the nice stuff that I have. And somehow, this idea that we want our lives just all perfect, all the lines in the row, all the lines pretty, so that when people come by and see how pretty the lines are, has so invaded our persona that it almost has the opposite effect. We've become isolated. So it's like the mice. You give them everything they want, you do what you can to make them happy, and they end up being not so mousy. And somehow, some way, when we have this desire that we want the lawn manicured, and I mean that allegorically, not specifically, when we want the lawn manicured, somehow it makes us less than human. Like something is missing because we want all our ducks in a row all the time. I saw this quote recently that says, "We invest so much in our isolated kingdom, begging to be noticed and approved by others, and what if we could escape that system entirely? What if somehow we could just get away from the mouse race or the rat race?" In Romans chapter 8 it says, "We know that for those who love God, God works all things together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son." And so I want to talk briefly about because that system seems impossible to escape. Like how do we ever actually get away from that thing that controls us, where we want everything just perfect so that people will notice us, so that we can feel self-actualized, when in reality that has kind of the opposite effect on our lives, and yet we keep trying and we keep striving and keep working towards it, and we feel trapped. Well, I think what the scriptures would tell us is this last line in this passage from Romans 8 is to be conformed to the image of his Son. That we're going to find out that Jesus and being conformed to the image of Jesus is the way to escape that race. There's this section of Scripture in the Gospel of Mark that starts in chapter 8 and ends in chapter 10, and it's a portion of those chapters. And it's really interesting because I've heard it at least called once the new Exodus of the crucified Lord, this passage from Mark 8 through Mark 10. So the Exodus, if you know the Bible story, is when all the slaves in Egypt escaped. So it was an escape from slavery. And it's interesting because this passage is called the way of the crucified Lord, or the exodus of the crucified Lord. And it's basically this portion of Scripture where Jesus takes his disciples and kind of gives them instructions on the ways that they're supposed to go, like the road that they're supposed to travel. So what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? Mark 8 through 10 says a whole lot about that. The interesting thing about this passage, the exodus of the crucified Lord, is it is bookmarked by healings of blind people on both sides. And so I don't know how purposeful Mark was in his chronology, but what you find is Jesus giving sight to someone who was blind, giving instruction to his disciples on the way they should go, and then giving sight to someone who was blind and having this lesson in between. And so it'd be really interesting if our eyes could be opened to a path out of this rat race that we find ourselves in. And the path that we find is one called the Via Dolorosa. And if you're not familiar with the Via Dolorosa is the Stations of the Cross in Jerusalem, where Jesus walked before he died. And the Via Dolorosa is Latin for the path of pain. And so you've got these last statements of Jesus before he died that were made along the Via Dolorosa, the path of pain. Interestingly, and a side note that has nothing to do with the sermon, if you've ever eaten at Ramsey's Cafe on the World here, Ramsey, his family has owned a house on the Via Dolorosa for 800 years, and he goes and does a pilgrimage every Easter. So if you ever get a chance to talk to Ramsey, ask him about his pilgrimage down the Via Dolorosa. He's a fascinating dude that would be very fun to talk to. But these passages, so it starts with the healing of a blind man, and then Jesus makes this statement to his disciples when he starts to talk to them about the path that they're supposed to go down. It says, calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. And we've done this once recently. I'm going to have you read this passage with me. So that's the beginning of the bookmark. So he heals a blind man, and then he says, if you're going to follow me, you're going to have to take up your cross, because anybody who wants to save their life has to lose their life. And then he closes up this section on the way with this passage from Mark. And if you would, just read this out loud with me. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so he lays out this passage, or this path that his disciples are expected to go down. And he talks about how, the story behind this story is that James and John, and it's funny, and in one of the other Gospels, it's actually their mom that comes. So the mom is dragging James and John to Jesus, saying, I want these guys to be first in your kingdom. When you get to heaven, I want James on your right and John on your left, or John on your right and James on your left. These are good boys, Jesus. Can you make this happen, right? And Jesus says these words. He says, you don't know what you're asking. That's Jesus' response to who's going to be great in the kingdom of heaven. He says, I don't think you want to know what it's going to take for that to be the case. But Jesus spells it out here. He says, if you want to be great in the kingdom of God, you must be servant to all. He uses words like servant and slave. And we rightly so reject the idea of slavery, and we rightly so kind of cringe at the idea of being a servant to someone else. But Jesus seems to indicate that the path out of the rat race, the path out of this inescapable prison we find ourselves in, has to do with service towards others, has to do with becoming a slave. I had a loved one a few years ago who started dating this girl, and he wanted me to give my opinion on the girl. So we got together and had a meal together and spent the day together and did various activities together. And he was wanting me to scope her out, basically, and give me some idea of, is this a winner or not? And I don't know that I'm qualified to do that. But a couple days later, he said, so what did you think about her? And I had noticed while we were together that she went out of her way to help people. Like if at the meal, if you needed a fork, she jumped up off her seat. And I know this is dating and everybody's doing their best to impress, so that's part of the reality. But she would jump up and go get a fork, or she would just ask, and she asked good questions about your life and seemed to care and have compassion about what was going on in your life. And so I noticed that about her. So when the guy asked me, what do you think about her? I said, she seems to have a servant's heart. Now, coming from where I was at in life and coming from my Christian perspective at that point, that's about the highest compliment you can give someone. This guy was not a believer at the time, and I found out a couple days later that I had sincerely offended him. Like he finally told me, he said, why would you call her that? Why would you want to make a woman a servant? Right? His take was that I was saying, well, she'll make a great wife for you one day because she's a servant. Like that's what he heard out of his worldview. Out of my worldview, what I was saying was the highest ideal a person can have is to serve. And in this book, Improving Your Serve, Charles Swindoll says this. He says, serving and giving don't come naturally. These ideas of serving another, laying down your life for another, that is not our natural inclination. Our natural inclination is survival of the fittest, climb the corporate ladder, be all we can be, right? These are the mantras that we're told from the time we're born. And yet the message of Jesus is that being a servant is about as good as it gets. Serving others and making sacrifices and walking the road of pain, going against what is natural to us, is the path to the kingdom of God. So we find this passage earlier talking about being conformed to the image of his Son. There's a passage in Scripture in 1 Corinthians that is kind of confounding. You know, you run across these passages in the Bible where you're reading them and they just make absolutely no sense. And you think, well, I'm just going to skip that and put that on the back burner and maybe figure it out later. And you never go back later. They're just there and they're just out there and forgotten. Well, there's this passage in 1 Corinthians 15 that I'm going to refer to in a moment. But I want to start in Genesis. And in this room, there's going to be people who take Genesis as narrative history, and there's going to be people who take Genesis as allegory, and there's going to be people who take it in between, and there's probably people in the room who don't give a rip what Genesis has to say. But in Genesis, it tells this story of the creation of mankind, when man started. And who was the first man? What was this person's name? Adam. The interesting thing about Adam is it comes from Adam, which is Hebrew for mankind. And so mankind and womankind is all encapsulated in this word Adam. And so whether you take it allegorically or as narrative history doesn't matter for this particular lesson. What matters is that we're saying this message was a message for all of mankind. And if it was literal history, then it trickled down from the singular man. If it was allegory, then it's a general lesson for us all. But we find out that Adam and Eve, the beginning of mankind, were instructed by God not to eat from the fruit of a particular tree, which was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God said, I just don't want you camping out there. Well, they did so. It's a longer story than this, but they ate from this fruit. Everybody's heard the story. And in all the pictures, it's an apple. It doesn't say it's an apple. It's just fruit of some sort. But they eat from it, and it says their eyes were opened. It says they could see really for the first time. And this is what we find out. It says the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. I chose a picture where they were naked but really far away so nobody was going to get offended. They may or may not be naked. You have no idea if this is a pre-fall or a post-fall picture. You can't tell. So they sewed fig leaves together and they made coverings for themselves. And what we find in this passage is, for the very first time, they became self-conscious. Before that, all they saw was God. Before that, all they saw was Him in all His glory. But when they fell, they thought, oh man, look at me. I gotta get my lawn striped just perfectly. I gotta get everything in order. I gotta get perfection going. And suddenly, this trap happened, where people were trapped. And now we get to this passage in 1 Corinthians that normally is just odd. It just doesn't make sense. But it says, for as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all will be made alive. The first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. And this is a comparison between man or mankind, depending on your perspective, of Adam the original, versus what they call the second Adam, Jesus, the second kind of man, the second kind of woman, the second Adam. And again, it's theologically odd and weird, and it's one of those passages that when I read it, it sounds like kind of like a cult would be reading this. But when you read what it's saying there was mankind, and mankind was doomed to die, doomed to the dust, going down, trapped. But then God sent Jesus as a new kind of man. And later it tells us here in Colossians, it says the Son being Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Notice that, the firstborn. He wasn't literally the first. He was the one before all time, but when it comes to being born, it's a different kind of firstborn. And he says, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. And this is the portion I want to really point out. It says, he is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. And so what it's saying is that mankind was trapped in this rat race of always having to have everything right and living for self. And it says, Jesus, the one who walked the Via Dolorosa, the one who walked the path of pain, ended in crucifixion, who became servant to all, is the firstborn of a new kind of man, a new kind of woman. And that it all hinges on him. And so at Daylight Church, we encourage people to be all in where Jesus is concerned. There's this book called $3 Worth of God. And I don't know if you guys can see it back there, but can anybody see the price? I know the ones in the front row can. Can you guys see the price for this book in the back? $1,000. It says there's 2 used copies out there, and they're each $1,000. And they're by this guy named Wilbur Reese. And the reason this book is $1,000 is, one, because it's very, very hard to find, but two, is because this poem that he's written is so fantastic. It's a collection of devotionals, and within those devotionals is this poem I'm about to share with you. But this is Wilbur Reese. And he actually died in July of this year. And he was just a deacon at his church. He was not a well-known preacher, a well-known pastor, anything like that. But he wrote this devotional with this poem in it that has become very famous and very valuable to people. And I want to read it to you real quick. It says, I would like to buy $3 worth of God, please. Not enough to explode my soul or disturb my sleep, but just enough to equal a cup of warm milk or a snooze in the sunshine. I don't want enough of God to make me love a black man or pick beets with a migrant. I want ecstasy, not transformation. I want warmth of the womb, not a new birth. I want a pound of the eternal in a paper sack. I would like to buy $3 worth of God, please. This guy was right. This was written in the early 70s, which is just after the civil rights movement and some of the civil rights transitions that we were experiencing. And so during this time, segregation was even probably more intense, but a different kind of segregation than we experience now. And what he was saying is, he says, I want just enough of God to make me feel comfortable when I sit in church. I want just enough God to where I can sleep soundly at night and feel like things are well. But I certainly don't want him breaking down my prejudices. I certainly don't want him opening up the lives of other people who are different from me to where I have to go in. I certainly don't want him revolutionizing or transforming my life. I just want him to make me cozy. And I think all of us, if you read the New Testament, you'll find that that's not the gospel message at all. The gospel message is some of the words he says, explode my soul, transformation, new birth. It's I am not who I was, I'm something new. And so we have started at Daylight Church, as we introduced last week, this service, study, worship, rest idea, that we have a path that we hope people will walk down. And it starts with service. So service, study, and worship are the 3 things that we're targeting through service projects, small groups, and worship services. And service is the beginning. And here's the neat thing about service. You don't have to be a Christian to come in here and serve. You don't have to believe what we believe to come in here and serve. You don't have to care about Jesus at all to come in here and say, I want to take care of mankind. I want to serve other people. Now, obviously, as a Christian church, we hope people will come to follow Jesus. But this is a church, in my opinion, that you can invite your friends to just come serve with us, whether they're atheists or Buddhist or Zoroastrian. They can come and they can serve. And so we're going to put on these quarterly service projects. And we believe that the Daylight Path starts with serving your neighbor. And serving your neighbor is a battle cry that everyone can get behind. Theology is difficult. Finding out what you believe and why you believe it is really challenging. Figuring out which parts of the Bible are prescriptive versus which parts are descriptive is a massive, lifelong challenge. How you're supposed to interpret Genesis is a huge thing to spend. You could spend hundreds of hours on it and go back and forth on how you're supposed to interpret these passages. It just gets very confusing. Where we're supposed to be on the aisle politically can be very confusing. But if you read the Bible, something, in my opinion, that stands out, that is crystal clear that we can all get behind, no matter what race, religion, or creed, is that we're supposed to help other people who have a hard time helping themselves. And I'm a believer that is part of the path to the light of Jesus. And the reality is, people of faith are the ones spearheading this. In fact, I forgot an announcement today. Kate Barron contacted me this week. And through her work, she knows of a family who my understanding is they're homeless because they've been kicked out of their home and they're starting to get reestablished. They have a new home now, but they lost everything in the transition. And she has worked with friends to take care of a lot of their base needs, but they're still in need of bunk beds, pots and pans, and some other essentials. Is that accurate? Right. Kara, we have a vacuum so we'll do the vacuum. We can take care of that. Kate, would you stand next to the next table on the way out so people can talk to you about that? Especially if you have bunk beds or you're willing to contribute towards bunk beds or something like that. We just want to take this stuff seriously. And I think as followers of Jesus, that when we hear stories like that, we don't just go, oh, that's terrible, I'll pray for you. But we actually do something. And so she'll be by the next table if you want to stop by and talk to her about ways that you can intercede. But we believe that when you serve your neighbor, you start to find your purpose. That ultimately, your purpose in life is twofold. It's to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And so if you ask the question, why am I here? What am I supposed to do? In my opinion, the foundational answer to that is serve somebody. It's the old Bob Dylan song. You're going to serve somebody. Everybody serves somebody. You can serve yourself, you can serve the devil, or you can serve God, and you can serve others. And serving somebody is the foundation of finding your purpose. And so we help those who have a hard time helping themselves. So let's just talk briefly and practically about some of the steps you can take to start being service-oriented, living outside yourself, because we believe that is the path of pain. It's not always going to be convenient. It's not always going to be easy, but it is always going to be like Jesus. And that's our goal here at Daylight Church. So number one, I want to say ask for a hundo. And what I mean is, we say we want $3 worth of God. I'm saying ask for $100 worth of God. Ask for $1,000 worth of God. It starts with a willingness to let God invade you. In my opinion, that's the foundation of this whole thing. You can really, really try. Here's what happens. You can say, well, HL preached a fairly decent sermon on service today, so I better get my ducks in a row and start showing up at the soup kitchen. And somehow, even showing up at the soup kitchen turns into you just still trying to get your lawn in order. You're still just trying to make your life look like it's supposed to look. And somehow, that's a different kind of self-consciousness, self-centeredness, is that my charitable efforts are just part of the picture of me getting my life in order. The work of Jesus is one that just gets you in there forgetting about self. The work of Jesus is one that gets in there and just somehow supernaturally breaks those chains and breaks that away from you and breaks that off of you so that you can be legitimately self-giving towards people. And so it starts with, we go back to that $3 poem. He says, I don't want enough to explode my soul. It starts with, yes, I do. That's what I want. I want so much God that my soul is different. My soul has changed. I don't want God to change me to where I'll love people different than me. I want ecstasy, not transformation. Now, I don't need ecstasy anymore. I want transformation. I need $100 worth of God. I need all of God. I need the whole account. I want it in me. And let Him come in and change you. Let Him do the work. And that is the message of the gospel of Jesus, is that God is in that business of changing lives, of coming in and uprooting everything and changing them. I want the warmth of the womb. I want to stay back where I'm at. It's comfortable. It's cozy. I don't want to be born. I don't want to be born again. I don't want to come out. So it starts with asking for all of God, and you'll have an opportunity to do that privately in your seat before this service is over, is just to say to God, I want it all. Or at least a lot more than maybe you're terrified to say I want it all. Well, give me more than I got now. Let God come in and transform me. I want to encourage you to pick the cruddy seat, and here's what I mean by that. This is Josh and Dottie McDowell, and I've had the great privilege of getting to know them on a personal level over the last several years. And if you don't know who Josh McDowell is, he wrote More Than a Carpenter and Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and he's written about 120 books. He's befriended almost every president over the last 50 years and served as counsel to them. He's served as counsel for large military organizations for recruiting purposes. He's had huge drives, filled stadiums to capacity with kids, trying to help them in recovery and help them to get away from drugs and alcohol. And he's just a pearl of a man. I mean, he and his wife are just as they're as Jesus-like as anybody I've ever met. Well, at one of these meetings where I was with him and Dottie, I ended up at the same table with them. So it was a meeting where there were about 20 tables in the room, and there was a keynote speaker, and Dottie and Josh were listening to the speaker. Well, I sat at the front seat because I was really interested in who the speaker was. Well, just after that, Dottie and Josh come in and sit down right next to me. So I'm sitting here, Dottie's here, Josh is here, and we're in the front seats in front of the speaker. So we're literally 10 feet from where the speaker will be on the platform. And Josh has his back to the speaker. Well, Dottie, and I'm the only person, it was such a privilege to see this moment. I'm the only person in the world that was privy to this conversation except for him and his wife. And Dottie leans over to Josh and she says, "Josh, why are we sitting here? These are the worst seats in the room." And he leans over to her and he says, "Exactly. That way they don't have to sit here." And he's talking about the other people in the room that get the prime seats because he's taking the crappy seat. And he wasn't doing this to impress anybody. He wasn't trying to get in good with one of the presidents. He wasn't trying to toot his horn as far as how he's packed stadiums full of people his entire life. Instead, he was saying, we'll sit here so they can have the good seats. And that's what I mean when I say choose the cruddy seat is the Via Dolorosa, the path of pain, is one of inconvenience. It's one of purposeful. We want Christianity to be cozy. We want Christianity to be comfortable. And it was never meant to be that. It was meant to be inconvenient. It was meant to be a take up your cross and die type religion. And so when we talk about the main message of Jesus, which is doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, what that means sometimes is sitting in a place where you're going to have to crane your neck to see. It means I don't have bunk beds, but somebody in town needs bunk beds. I'm going to give up part of my vacation fund to buy them bunk beds. It's that kind of thinking. It's I am willing to be inconvenienced. So when I say take the cruddy seat, what I mean is on a regular basis, followers of Jesus are filled with this desire to sacrifice self for someone else. And so it means every day looking for opportunities, looking for ways to lay yourself down. They might be minuscule. It might be something around the house. You might notice that your spouse or your friend, your neighbor, has the gutters on your neighbor's house are coming down and you know that he's been sick for 2 weeks. Well, a Christian gets on their ladder and gets up there and fixes those gutters for them. Even if it's raining outside, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you would rather stay home and watch football on a Saturday afternoon, instead you're making the sacrificial choice, the Via Dolorosa choice, the path of pain. You're taking inconvenience upon yourself. Now, as far as our programs and what we're doing 4 quarterly service projects, and so when it comes to the service portion of the Daylight Path, we're going to try to create opportunities for people to step in and actually make a difference in people's lives. And this Thanksgiving, we're doing a Thanksgiving dinner for this place called Site 61, which is in the Portland area. And the majority of the people who show up at Site 61 will never have a Thanksgiving feast because they can't afford one, and many of them don't have loved ones or friends that would host one for them. And so we're hosting a Thanksgiving feast for people who would normally not get a Thanksgiving feast. And to me, that feels like Jesus. That feels like the kind of stuff that churches ought to be doing. Now, what does that mean for you as an individual? It's twofold. One is be there, be a part, contribute. But 2, we're looking for a leadership team. We're going to put a budget together, and we haven't decided on that budget, but we're going to try to make it fairly substantial. And we're going to say, how do we make this feast memorable, like unforgettable? How do we make it excellent? And so we're looking for a team of people who will say, I want to be a part of making that event excellent. And guess where you go to sign up for that? MyDaylightChurch.com. That's right, MyDaylightChurch.com. It was recommended to me this week that we put a picture of it for the not-so-tech savvy up there. So if you go to MyDaylightChurch.com, this is what you're going to see. You'll see our soundtrack, which is some of the music that we played for you last week. It's just music that we like. And then there's the service tab. And the service tab, you can see underneath it, there's a picture of Site 61 even now. And on there right now, you go to MyDaylightChurch.com, you click on service, and it's asking you, would you like to be a part of this team? Now, I know not everybody is, we don't need 90 people on this team. We're looking for 6 or 8, so we'll probably, I don't know, if all of you sign up today because of the sermon, then we'll sift it out somehow. But if you would be willing to serve on this team, then it would probably mean 2 or 3 meetings between now and November on how to make this an exceptional event. Just go to MyDaylightChurch.com, and sign up. And there's the service tab. So this is what it looks like. And you'll see our upcoming events are a Valentine's Day party in a nursing home in February, the St. Jude's Recovery Center Spring Retreat. We're going to try to make it the best weekend of their lives. And then hopefully in August of next year, we'll be able to work it out to put on a kids festival for Ark Elementary here in town. But the service tab at My Daylight Church is the stuff that we're doing. There's also an other opportunities and calendar tab on there that will tell you about other stuff that you can get involved with if you want. But these are the things we're focusing our efforts on. I want to close with the idea from the Velveteen Rabbit. So the Velveteen Rabbit is hanging out in a nursery one day and encounters what they call the skin horse. And the skin horse is this old horse that's all beat up and nasty, and his eyes kind of bug out, and the threads are worn bare, and his skin is 8 tones because he's been rubbed so much. And they get in a conversation about what it means to be real. And this is how the conversation goes. It's a little long, but I wanted to read it to you. It says, "The skin horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath. Most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had been a long succession of mechanical toys arrived to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew that they were only toys and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the skin horse, understand all about it. So what is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you're made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "Doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." The perfect lawn, the perfect house, the perfect job, celebrity, fame, popularity, none of that is what makes a human being. Just like being fat and happy doesn't make a mouse a mouse. Getting all the stuff you want or all the things that you think you want is not the solution. The solution is to be worn down. The solution is to die. The solution is to be beat up in service of others. And so we can't seek this warm in the womb Christianity that we all really, really hunger for. There's something way beyond that of coming out of the womb and being born again to be real and alive in a sense that I'm willing to hurt. I'm willing to be inconvenienced. I'm willing to hang the gutters for my neighbor who is hurting.